everyone, and welcome to our satellite session, Storytelling to Change Laws and Fight Stigma. My name is Kathy Brown, and I'm the Executive Director of the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. We are honored to be a sponsor of the International AIDS Society's Scientific Conference. Elizabeth Taylor worked tirelessly throughout the 1980s when the AIDS crisis was fueled by fear. In 1991, she founded the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation to fulfill her vision of an AIDS-free world. Elizabeth spent her life fighting for marginalized communities, and we have been honored to continue that legacy. And since last June, thanks to the partnership of Gilead Sciences, Inc., we have joined a number of extraordinary partners, such as the Health Not Prisons Collective, in the fight to modernize and reform the outdated laws that discriminate against people living with HIV in the US and around the world. In addition to being a staunch activist, Elizabeth was an incredible storyteller. For that reason, much of our work has been rooted in the power of narrative to change hearts and to change minds. It's through story and a little help from our celebrity friends that we've been able to educate the general public about HIV criminalization. It's through story that we've been able to educate lawmakers. And story plays a pivotal role in modernizing criminal laws and penalties that affect people living with HIV. That's why we're excited to present this session with all of you today. We believe that a good story has the power to effectively end stigma, and we have recruited some of the most creative storytellers to help you tell yours. Our first presenter is an actor, producer, and a champion of ETAF's HIV Is Not a Crime initiative. Known for his roles in the Star Trek movies and for his numerous stage appearances, including Angels in America, I am honored to welcome Zachary Quinto. But first, please take a look at his latest contribution to the HIV Is Not a Crime initiative as the producer of the True Not Crime episode featuring Diana Oliva.
This is the story of a transgender woman named Diana. Diana is a first-generation American, the child of Mexican immigrants who came to the United States and moved to a rural town in California. In 2000, Diana was diagnosed with HIV at 27 years old. Her sister was there with her at the clinic when she received the news. The doctor wanted her to begin treatment immediately, but Diana feared it would be impossible to discreetly receive HIV treatment in her small town. Diana moved to Los Angeles to begin her treatment. She suppressed her viral load until she was no longer capable of passing on the virus. She no longer had to hide her status, but she still struggled with her gender identity. Diana wanted to begin her medical transition, but couldn't. The cost was too high. Yet she knew she could only survive in the world if she lived honestly. In desperation, she turned to sex work, selling her body in order to save her life. Diana was arrested multiple times, but the money from sex work would make her transition possible, so she continued. In the spring of 2002, an undercover officer arrested Diana again.
The people charged Diana Oliva with one count of solicitation. Per Criminal Procedure Code, the people request that the court order testing of the defendant for the human immunodeficiency virus, also referred to as HIV.
Now, the state knew she had HIV. 2 months later, she was in jail again. The other arrests had been misdemeanors, but this time was different.
The people additionally charged the defendant Diana Oliva with one count of felony solicitation while HIV positive.
If she was convicted of a felony, Diana would be sentenced to 3 to 8 years in state prison. Diana's freedom depended on having suitable representation to defend her in that moment. But the only person who was there for her, her public defender, had no knowledge about HIV. It immediately became obvious to Diana that if she was going to survive, she would have to advocate for herself.
The court finds the defendant guilty of one count, misdemeanor solicitation.
Instead of nearly a decade in state prison, Diana was sentenced to 60 days in county jail. During her time there, she was mistreated and misgendered. The word he/she written on her cell door. Correction officers tried to use her for sex. She was dehumanized. 2 years after her release, Diana had medically transitioned and received her bachelor's degree. The following year, she received her master's degree in social work from Columbia University. She became a leading professional in HIV advocacy. Today, Diana is the Associate Director of Public Affairs in Advocacy and Community Engagement at Gilead Sciences, one of the largest HIV researchers in the world. She develops global initiatives for transgender people and manages millions of dollars of philanthropic funds to support trans-led organizations and to end the criminalization of HIV. Laws targeting people living with HIV were created decades ago. They aren't based in current science. They're based on the same stigma and shame that almost cost Diana her life, a life that is entirely my own. I am Diana, and this is my HIV true story.
My name is Zachary Quinto. I am an actor and a producer, and I've been collaborating with the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation on the HIV Is Not a Crime initiative. I've been producing content to raise awareness and to help overturn legislation in states where HIV is still criminalized. I had no idea when I was first approached that these laws were on the books in the United States. I was blown away and horrified to learn that, but I felt really compelled to get involved on behalf of my community, and particularly on behalf of the people in my community who don't necessarily have the privilege and the resources that I've been afforded in my life and experience. And so I felt like it was a way to channel energy, both professionally and personally, into something that would make a difference, exploring other ways to raise awareness using storytelling and to engage people on a level that might help them understand how damaging these laws are and how many lives they affect adversely and unnecessarily. And so we thought it was a really great opportunity to use what we know and get involved. The True Not Crime format was already in motion when we came into the process. So we collaborated with our creative partners to figure out how we could best bring that to life. And so what you just saw is one of 3 examples of these short form narrative introductions to people who have been directly affected by these laws, in the hope that that exposure will generate a kind of relatability, a kind of empathy, and a kind of call to action for people who realize just how detrimental these laws can be. Well, I think one challenge is finding people who are willing to share their stories and are able to articulate and communicate in a way that is dynamic enough to hold people's attention for even a few minutes. And ultimately, we made the decision that it's more impactful for an audience to have exposure to someone who's actually gone through this rather than someone who is somehow reenacting something that is so traumatic and upsetting on so many levels. We wanted an opportunity for an audience to meet and experience the people themselves, even though they're not performers per se. They lived this, they lived what they're talking about. And we thought that ultimately that was a more valuable delivery system than if we got actors or recognizable faces or people to come in that that would only be able to approximate the impact that these experiences had on individuals. Humor is always a really good element when it's possible, when it's appropriate. I think levity is something that can draw people in with a kind of curiosity and openness that they might not have if you're coming at something from a more straightforward perspective, subverting expectations and being as playful as you can be. Obviously, when you're dealing with an issue such as HIV and lives being ruined by obsolete laws that are still on the books in so many places, we didn't really have the opportunity to lean into the humor of that because it's not really funny at all. However, I do think that engaging people in a visceral way, so if it's not humor, maybe it's color or music, inviting people into an experience using elements of the narrative process that are easily relatable, easily accessible. These are ways that I think you can wrap a serious and important message up in a way that makes it more palatable, more intriguing, and more inviting to an audience.
My name is George M. Johnson. I am the best-selling author of All Boys Aren't Blue. I first became involved with the HIV Is Not a Crime campaign because of my relationship with who the first story was about. The first story was about Robert Suttle, who is a dear friend of mine. I actually met Robert in HIV support group back in 2014 when he came to share his story about how he was criminalized from a situation and placed in jail under HIV criminalization laws. For years, I've been a writer, a journalist, and one of the most vocal people who is living with HIV. And so when this came about, to tell the story, I was asked to specifically write the story. And I found no better person to join this work with someone like Robert, who inspires me and helped me along my journey as I was still coming to terms with the fact that I was HIV positive. And so for me, I felt lending my writing voice and lending my style and my technique and giving of my services to continue to fight against the criminality of HIV. It wasn't just something that I needed to do. It was necessary because it was part of my purpose, and it was part of what my calling is, as I hope to see a generation that does not have to deal with the epidemic as my generation has, as my ancestors hoped that they didn't have to see people deal with the epidemic the way that that they had to. And so working on this particular project, it was very cathartic in many ways because I was able to think about my own issues around disclosure and think about the fact that I am still a criminalized body in this country, and that anytime I lend my pen and my voice to any of these type of causes, it is a rejection of the notion that HIV is a crime. For me, I was someone who operated from a space of nobody can hurt me with my own story if I tell it first, or if I'm the one who's most proud of it. And so for me, it was necessary to tell it out loud because one, I could no longer feel shame for it. And I no longer felt like I had to carry the burden of a secret. And two, I felt I could be a possibility model for others who I knew were struggling with the issues around disclosure and the issues around living with HIV. It's a very interesting virus in terms of publicity when you really think about how millions of people live with HIV, but you only can name a few publicly, right? And how you're still watching people like Billy Porter just now disclose his status publicly after nearly 50 years of living. I think for me, it was just a vehicle to be more of a vessel for my community and to carry that torch that so many before me carried into the next generation, because in healing yourself, you in turn heal others. And I felt that having that public journey of healing through telling what my status was and being confident in saying I'm still fully human and I am still fully here, and I am still fully whole, in turn would help my community see that the virus is just a part of our journey. It is not the totality of our existence. Writing has always been that thing that has carried us throughout time. When certain trends end, writing has never stopped being the most powerful tool that we have. Writing has never stopped being the most powerful vessel of communication in many ways. we all don't learn the same. So writing isn't the only way that we learn, but we have watched how writing can be transformed into tweets and how tweets have then became movements. We have watched how writing gets transformed into television shows. And then people who couldn't learn through a book or couldn't learn through an article are able to learn through a different vessel of television. We have watched how writing becomes audiobook. And so the auditory learners also have a chance to understand what the word is that is being written down somewhere in a book. And so in many ways, writing is the vessel that starts it all. Writing is how we get the word out there. It is still one of the fastest ways that we can spread a message about a movement or spread a message about a concern or spread a message about a truth and be able to tell our truth. I feel that writing also in many ways is one of the most healing things that we have. Journaling is still one of the top techniques that many people use when it comes to how we can express ourselves and how we can heal ourselves and how we can work on our own mental health. And so writing, again, you know, when we think about the mighty Toni Morrison, or when you think about just any of those great architects of thought and of vision and of leadership, many of them were writers. And so I think we continue to watch how writing and books and storytelling specifically will always stand the test of time because they can always be transformed into a different type of medium for anybody who needs to learn from it. Yeah, the best platforms are still the big three, as I like to say, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But I also think watching this new generation of TikTok has been transformative in the way that we are able to digest information and the way that we're able to share information. I think I love when you see someone take an article and break down an article or break down a book in 60 seconds or less for people and give them the important themes and the important topics that they can pull from. Medium has become a great tool for so many who just have something to say and want to be able to write it and share it in a way that journalism may not capture. As someone who worked as a journalist for many years, you know, they want to hit topics when they're hot. They don't want to talk about topics when they're not. And so when we think about topics like HIV, everyone talks about HIV during Pride Month. Everyone talks about HIV during specific testing days. Everyone talks about HIV during World AIDS Day. But we live with this virus 365 days a year. And so it is important that we are able to communicate those stories and those truths all year round. Platforms like Medium allow us to write the stories and write the truths that we need to get out there, even when they are not popular. And even when they are not trending, to create a trend in many ways, because sometimes what happens is you actually create the trend and then everybody picks up the story on the back end. All of the apps and social media just in general have become such a powerful vessel of sharing information in a way that we've never seen before, which can be both good and bad. But I think in many ways it's good because you get to, in real time, find out what is going on in the world and what is going on in your community in a way that we have never been able to do before. And again, I think the great thing about it is these three apps or four apps allow us to all learn differently. So for the reader, when an article gets shared, they can read it. For the listener, you have video and you have audio where, you know, these articles can be played. And so it has created a new space of learnings, which again connects to hundreds of millions of people across the world in a matter of minutes. I think it is very important to know your audience and to know where you are pitching particular stories. If you are pitching a place like a BET, you have to realize that your audience is going to be primarily Black. So you have to speak about the topic from that particular lens. If your audience is BuzzFeed, that's going to be a more universal audience. So you're going to have to be more inclusionary in your language around the epidemic and just around what you're talking about. It is okay to make topics digestible. So taking high-level theories, high-level statistics, high-level data, high-level research, and breaking it down in a way that a sixth grader can understand, especially when you realize that the epidemic, one of the brackets that is still most highly infected is age 13 to 24. So a 13-year-old needs to understand the same thing that a 24-year-old needs to understand, because when it comes to certain pandemics and epidemics, they actually exist within the same community of vulnerability. And we're in a time where our healthcare is tethered to one another. Our decisions affect the people around us. And so it's extremely important that even if I have a master's degree and can read at this level, the information that I can digest, I need to make sure that the people around me can also digest. It puts what is imagined into reality. I think many times, because you can't attach it to a person, or you can't attach how this thing is harming people because you don't see it, it then goes to the back of mind as a thing that needs to be changed, or a thing that needs to be corrected, or still needs to be addressed. And so with storytelling, people then learn that there are people who are still affected by these laws. Many laws that are in place in this country have still been around here since Jim Crow, have been around here since prior to Jim Crow. I think we had a case where there was a law that was enacted during the last 4 years of the White House that dated back to pre the ending of slavery. It was a military act law that was enacted, that was used, that was pre-slavery. And so when we think about how storytelling works as a vehicle, storytelling, you can't deny a person's truth when they are still sitting there. And it is hard to deny a person when they are right there in your face telling you that this law harms me in this way, and this thing harms me in this way. It is very easy when laws don't necessarily affect you, but it is much harder when you have to actually come face to face with the truth of the matter that you may be aiding in someone else's oppression. And so storytelling allows us to put truth out there in a way that society has often denied us the access to. And so the more we continue to tell the story of the HIV epidemic, how the HIV epidemic, although science has changed, and although technology has changed, and though we can now live with the virus, and we can live as people who no longer transmit the virus, the stigma is still wrapped around the height of the epidemic. The laws are still wrapped around the criminalizing of people who never should have been criminalized in the first place. We are never going to get to a place where we can end the epidemic if people don't understand that there is still an epidemic.
Hey everyone, I'm Zachary Drucker. I'm an artist, director, cultural producer, and a champion of the HIV Is Not a Crime campaign. Why are we criminalizing something that we know no longer harms people? It's completely ludicrous and obsolete. I champion the cause of decriminalizing HIV because it contributes to the stigma and people not being able or willing to be out as HIV positive for fear of legal retribution. It's 2021. This virus has existed now for 4 decades, and it is a sustainable condition that people can now live long lives. HIV disproportionately impacts communities of color, and in particular, the trans and gender expansive communities. Trans folks have survived from existing in the underground economy. We are so often put in dangerous situations and are exposed to HIV at incredibly high rates by criminalizing folks for not disclosing their serostatus. It increases the stigma that people feel willing to share their status. And at this point, 40 plus years in, we have a moral and ethical responsibility to flow into the future and to take these discriminatory laws off the books. I think that storytelling is the greatest vehicle for empathy. Once you know somebody's story, it's really impossible to persist or to continue to discriminate against them. It's hard to hate up close. And ultimately, many people don't have direct access to stories of marginalized people in their physical realities, in their communities. And so film and television offers an opportunity to expand our culture's notions of difference, really one individual at a time. I'm so proud of what we were able to do with Transparent as an inciting moment, as a show that tried to correct a long history of misrepresentation and malignment. It's just been the honor of my life to create representations of trans people in our culture. It's really incredible to think about how far we've come in representing the stories of trans and gender expansive people in our culture. In the past 8 years, we've made more progress than I thought I would see in my lifetime. And it's been a great honor and a privilege to be a part of that cultural shift. I think it takes all of us doing this work simultaneously for the rest of our lives to be a part of something that pushes the needle forward. The rights of trans people are at the center of a culture war, the center of a polarized nation in which half of our population is moving ahead, over and next into the future, and half is indignant and trying to turn back the hands of time. But time only moves in one direction, and the desire to return to the past is futile. It won't happen. I think we have only one choice, truly, and that is to be on the right side of history and to recognize that change is the only guarantee in life. It's such a noisy culture that we're living in right now, and it's infinitely distractible. When we're able to create clear messages through art, through film, television, through storytelling, when we're able to cut through the noise and reach people directly, there is no more powerful form of changing people's ideas, of changing people's hearts. I believe that creating art and creating love are the two most noble things that we can do. We have an opportunity to really connect and to be a part of a collective consciousness. And we owe it to ourselves and to our talent to reach the broadest possible audience. Some folks have an instinct to expel and reject things that are different, things that they are not accustomed to. Not everybody has that impulse, but I think that it's certainly out there. And to humanize stories of people who are different, and to create pathways to universal experience, to humanize stories of people that you really have nothing in common with or think that you have nothing in common with, and to realize, oh, there is something there that mirrors my experience. There is something there that I relate to. The more specific you are, the more universal it is. And I think that that really defines the cultural moment that we are in today. I know that when I'm very specific about my experience, that it transcends boundaries and borders and languages, that I am able to reach people through vulnerability, through shared human experience. It is hard won to become the person that you are meant to be, to manifest in this lifetime your most truthful, most integrated self, to not be compartmentalized and secretive and kind of putting things away in order to maximize love and acceptance. We can be loved and accepted in all of our flaws, in all of our messiness, in all of our imperfections. And HIV is a part of that tapestry. If we actually saw those as superpowers, if we saw living with HIV as a lens in which to see the world, as a way of recognizing the precarity and the preciousness of life and not taking it for granted. Living with HIV, I think, is a tremendous advantage in some ways. As many disabilities or living with chronic illnesses are, it changes your worldview. When you are true to yourself and true to your story, you are able to reach other people. I don't think that our content needs to be overwrought or overly didactic or informative or educational. I think that there is something much more direct about connecting to the shared human experience through emotions and through humor. I think that humor is the great equalizer, and it's the most challenging form of writing. It's the most challenging form of perseverance, to be able to transform all of your darkness or the things that have weighted you down in life and turn it into comedy, is a tremendous tool for reaching people. It's relatable. It's oftentimes universal. I mean, I think in 2021, it's a very different time. We have the agency and the autonomy to disclose our status under whatever circumstances we choose. We have the agency to self-define and to present ourselves to the world as who we are, and nobody can take that away from us.
Well, I'm Charles Stevens. I'm the founder and executive director of the Counter Narrative Project, or CNP. We work at the intersection of narrative justice and social justice. Our work builds power among, amplifies the voices of Black gay men, but we also are committed and work in solidarity with all movements committed to racial and social justice. Our framework is the belief that to have social change, you have to have narrative change, and that in order to change policies, you have to change narratives. And we believe in doing that through content creation. My background is in community organizing, but the thread I think that has connected much of my work and my efforts has been around stories. When I became connected to the HIV decriminalization movement, I was really impressed by the brilliance of the statewide organizing efforts, particularly around changing state laws and engaging state legislatures. And it became clear to me early on that narratives were informing policy, were reproducing the stigma, were really maintaining the status quo as it relates to the HIV criminalization laws. So I began to wonder, well, what would it look like to intervene on the narrative level? So if these narratives were going to be destructive, then our work was to hack the narratives, to counter the narratives, to really try to use what was being used against us, but use it in the service of justice. And so I think at a certain point, as I began to find a political home within the movement, and I started connecting with other amazing organizations like Positive Women's Network USA and like the US People Living with HIV Caucus and the Transgender Law Center, it became clear to me that HIV criminalization was absolutely a racial justice issue. The summer of 2014, when the Black Lives Matter movement really, I think, came to public awareness in a very robust way was also around the time that Michael Johnson's case. He was a young Black man at the time in Missouri. He was incarcerated under that state's HIV criminalization laws. His story became more part of public attention. And that was sort of my entry point in wanting to be supportive of him and in ensuring his freedom. Mass incarceration disproportionately impacts the lives of Black people, is also very connected to how we think about HIV stigma, how we think about the ways that public health is a part of the carceral state. Like all these things were sort of converging, and a desire to sort of disentangle some of these narratives and be able to present them to people in a way that would inspire them to action and to want to get involved in the cause. And that's really a lot of the work, right? Like, how do you take these very often horrific narratives, very disempowering narratives, and you create narratives that make people want to get involved, that want to raise their voice, that want to, that can believe that something better is possible. One of the reasons why I think people are able to get behind imprisoning people, they're able to get behind punishing people, is that we're taught that some people are some groups and some people are more deserving of punishment, they're more deserving of incarceration than other people. And so we become almost numb to it. It's something that we not only expect, but assume. And I found that what happens when you sit down in a group of people where you're all looking at each other, you're all talking to each other, everyone's humanity becomes centered. And I think that's really core in moving hearts and minds. Like, you're not able to move hearts and minds unless you're able to see the humanity. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to speak to a group of Black LGBTQ youth, and we're talking about HIV stigma, we're talking about HIV criminalization. And as an exercise, I asked if people that believed that HIV criminalization laws were just to stand on one side of the room, and people that thought that the laws were unjust to stand on the other side of the room. And this was sort of early on in the workshop, to create a visual of people's value system. So even though most of the people thought the laws were unjust, there were still some people that thought the laws were just. And I wanted to create a conversation, and also wanted people to take a stand, literally and figuratively. The stakes of what they were claiming and saying were okay needed to be just spelled out more. And, after that, we sat down and we talked about it, and we not only talked about the issue from a public health perspective, why it's bad for public health, and we even broke it down in terms of humanity. And we talked about just the ways that Black people in general are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system, and the ways that mass incarceration not only destroys lives, but destroys communities, and really just framing it in a larger issue around social justice. I could see everyone in the room begin to transform. And yes, sometimes there are uncomfortable spots in conversations, but there also has to be a willingness to work through those difficult spots, and to also give people space to work through some of the assumptions they may make. Certainly, perhaps it wasn't the spectacular, breathtaking policy victory that is often heralded in our movement, but my belief is that it takes these sort of micro political moments where you're able to connect to groups, small groups, large groups, even one-on-one, and you're able to change some minds, and you're able to change some hearts. Really tailoring your message to your audience. I don't think there's a one size fits all message that moves across multiple audiences. I do think that there's something about tailoring your message specifically to the groups of people you're trying to move, but really trying to figure out, what is our messaging strategy? What are the kinds of narratives that we need to see circulate around this issue? Because again, there isn't a one size fits all message. And I think to do that, I think sets us at a disservice. So what are all the kinds of messages that we need to get out, and who are the people that we need these messages to get to and connect to? If we're able to build trust with the people we're trying to reach, it allows us to be able to take certain risks. It allows us a certain degree of vulnerability. And I think it also allows them a willingness to be open, if there really truly is trust from speaker to audience. There are many kinds of expertise and many different kinds of knowledge. I strongly encourage us as a movement to really see information sharing as a very democratic process. There is a certain expertise that comes with a very rigorous understanding of the law. I think that's really important. But I also think that there's a kind of expertise that comes from being a part of an impacted community. I think there's an expertise that comes with being able to tell a good story. So I might not yet be an expert on, let's say, HIV criminalization laws or statutes, but I'm really good at being able to tell a story, or I'm really good at crafting language, appealing to the senses in a way that can help move hearts and minds. I really do believe that we need everyone at the table, right? I come into this with a lot of grace because, you know, if there's any lesson I've learned in movements is that infighting can just be so painful and so dehumanizing. And I think that sometimes happens when people aren't able to assume the best intentions, right? Now, that's not to say there should not be accountabilities, so I don't want to let people off the hook in that regard, but I do think there has to be a space for grace. One of the big opportunities that is sometimes missed in our movement is our ability to build coalition and build a bigger tent with allied movements. If you're working in the service of HIV criminalization, it absolutely makes sense for you to be aligned with other movements committed to various kinds of like combating mass incarceration. You should be aligned in some ways with folks working in the broader racial justice movement. And I think that when there is any kind of HIV decriminalization efforts that don't recognize racial justice, that don't recognize the persistence and the sheer force of mass incarceration, I mean, I think you're going to lose. So my hope is that we won't continue to make mistakes around just operating outside of those forces. Storytelling and narrative change shouldn't be an elective in our movement. I don't think it should be niche. I think it should be normalized. I think it should be centered. I think it should be one of the most dominant strategies that we use. If we're able to really stand behind the power and value of storytelling, I think that it will create more inspiration for people to be a part of it. I believe that if we are able to really see change around this issue, then taken together, perhaps some of the things I shared may hopefully move the needle just a bit.
To close our session, I'm excited to introduce Kyle Coons. Kyle is the founder and CEO of XX Artist, an emerging digital marketing agency focused on building community through content with today's biggest brands and talents. We have been honored to have Kyle and his team supporting the HIV Is Not a Crime initiative with compelling social media content. And we're excited to have him walk all of you through a presentation on how to use social media to tell your own story.
What a wonderful video. I have loved hearing from everyone so far and hope that everyone that's attending today has received value so far in this session on storytelling. I want to thank the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation for today's time and of course for having me to speak today. I want to hop into our agenda. I'm looking forward to the next chunk of time that we have together for this break-off session. Here's how I'm hoping to spend the time with you all today. I'm going to give you a welcome, a little bit about me and what I do and why I'm here today. And then we're going to hop into the session that I've built out for us today, which is bringing your message to life on social media. We're going to wrap it up with a group exercise, which I'm very excited to kind of deploy some of those skills. We're going to put the question function and feature to the test later on today. And so fingers crossed that all works for us. So this presentation, I want to let you know, the time for today will be used to discuss social media and its ability to move audiences to action. More specifically, how we can create content that achieves that is something that I am passionate about. As I start to tell you a bit about myself, I welcome you to share in the chat with one another who you are, where you're from, what you do. But about me, I am going to let you know that my name is Kyle Coons. I identify as a gay male and go by the pronouns he, him. This slide says a bunch of fancy stuff about me, but I will cut to the chase about who I am and why I'm here. I am a college dropout from Kaiser, Oregon. I got my start in social marketing and storytelling in 2014 with YouTube Red, which was their first premium video on demand product. Through that work, I met my first and longest standing client, Lily Singh, who is a global superstar YouTube force of nature who has over 30 million followers on social media. My work with Lily included leading her social impact work with her social good campaign, Girl Love, and her partnerships with organizations like UNICEF, CTOP, and many more. Fast forward to today, I am the CEO and founder of XX Artists, a company of 60 based out of Playa Vista, California. Our mission at XX is to create community through content online. Our services circulate around social media marketing, creative services, and partnerships, and that work comes to life through partnerships with YouTube, Google, Brie Larson, Mattel, and none other than Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. That is enough about me. So bringing your message to life on social. Before we start, I want to ask you to think about these questions as a way to set our stage for today's time. First, how do you currently leverage social media to bring your message to life? Think on it for a moment. And the answer may be you don't, and that's okay. Second, taking a step back, how do you leverage marketing in general to bring your message to life on social or otherwise? And third, I love this one. Can you remember the last time something on social media moved you to act or care or view an issue, individual, or cause differently? These are questions that I'm always asking myself, not only as a social media marketer, but also just to ensure that I'm always thinking about my own experience with social from a perspective too. The goal of today's session is to understand how you can bring your message to life in an impactful and strategic way online. I'm going to outline the necessary steps to do so from my experience. So let's start by square one, understanding our goal. How I approach understanding my goal is first, thinking to myself, what is driving the message or story that I want, or in some cases need, to tell? Is it a personal passion, a cause we care about, the purpose of the organization that we're employed by? And then second, I ask myself, why is it important to me and my team to get this message out into the world? Do we receive personal benefit? Are we being measured on getting this message out into the world at our workplace? Some would call this defining purpose. To me, work invested without a goal or purpose can often result in work wasted. And so even something that seems as simple as social media content is important to go into it with a goal defined. Taking us into step two, defining our message. I'll use our partners at Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation as an example with their campaign, HIV Is Not a Crime. In their video content, are we trying to tell a story of wrongful incarceration? Or are we actually trying to share the message that, as the campaign name implies, HIV is not and should not be a crime? I always like to say that the message you first confidently land on is likely one layer away from what your message should be. Dig deeper, be specific in your messaging. Now that we have a message in mind, we need to understand, who are we aiming to reach with this message? This is one of the most important exercises me and my team and you can do for your work. Who will take the action or have the change of mind or engage with this message? Are we aiming to reach everyday citizens, lawmakers, policymakers, young adults? Now that we know who we're trying to reach, we need to be critical about, where do they exist online? How do we reach them online? If we're trying to reach my mom, a mid-50s US woman, for example, we may want to strategize for Facebook before we think about a more youthful audience platform like Twitch or TikTok. It's important to understand where audience behave online, because oftentimes these platforms will actually dictate the content that we are producing. YouTube, for example, can support longer form content, while TikTok is only going to allow you vertical videos at a shorter clip, and so on and so forth with the other platforms and online marketing spaces that we have available to us these days. Next, it's important to think, how do they communicate? I like to break this into two sections. What content do they share and engage with? Do a quick audit and see what's resonating. Is it memes and humorous videos that resonate with the audience you're trying to reach? Or is it specific content like cooking and animal content that resonates most with them? There's also many resources available in terms of what type of content is consumed by each audience type online that I encourage you to explore. Now that we kind of have a feel for what content and creative they're consuming, it's important for us to go a layer deeper, and perhaps more importantly, how are they speaking, right? This is important to keep in mind because we've all been on the receiving end of content that is intended for us, but doesn't meet the mark in terms of voice and tone. We need to meet our audience where they're at, adopting their verbiage and not pressing something onto them that isn't authentic to how they behave online. This can also be done through an audit of your audience online and understanding how are they speaking with one another? How can we come in a voice that is authentic to the community that we're trying to reach online? Now that we've defined our audience, it's important before we invest time and resources into producing and publishing anything, we need to be critical, or we need to implement the critical step of understanding what success looks like and ensuring that stakeholders, be it your partner or your client or yourself, are aligned in understanding what are we defining as realistic success for our content on social media. This will always range, but some examples that are tied to social storytelling specifically to consider include followers, impressions on your content, engagement, likes and comments, shares of your content. Often for some of the messages that we're trying to get out, shares are a key metric. Web or link clicks. Are we driving people to another resource that we want to get eyes on? Page visitors. All of these can be useful benchmarks in terms of how are we measuring success for this campaign that are tied to the social platforms themselves. Measurement that isn't tied to a platform or social media directly, but could be relevant to your goal, could include education and awareness of a specific issue or person or cause. Second, it could be customers, clients, patients in terms of converting an audience to come along to your product or service or whatever it may be. Signups is another, often tangible way of measuring our success through social campaigns. And so now that we know our message and our audience, it's time to combine the two into a content strategy. First, it's important to think about how we create content that's in line with everything we know about our goal, our message and audience, who they are and where they exist online, to create something that compels them to want to engage or share. Is your message one that is short and specific and can be communicated in a simple graphic? Great. Is your message intricate and in need of a little bit more room to breathe for your audience to understand it properly? Perhaps we consider multi-part content or longer form video content like YouTube. Is your message one that is positive and playful and can be translated into a less formal format online like TikTok? Asking these questions are key to understanding what will be the best format for your content to come to life on social media. Once you've defined that content type, it's important to think about how you can optimize that content to encourage action from your audience. Some ways of encouraging action and driving them to share or enabling them to drive your message include call to actions, CTAs, explicit copy or call outs in your content with the desired action you want your audience to take can often be the lowest barrier to entry way to drive that action. Second, hashtag campaigns. Introduce a hashtag that communicates your message succinctly. Third, tags. And I mean this in terms of tagging other people into your content. So relatability is a big driver of online engagement, as we all know through our own personal behavior with these social platforms. So can you include copy in the post that you're publishing that asks your audience to tag in like-minded individuals around a certain cause? Another way to drive them to share your message or story is reward. How do we incentivize your audience to take action and engagement on the content that we've produced? And then last, and I think that this is a selective one, but challenges. I think that this is something that I recommend being selective in introducing. But if you feel you have an audience that's large enough to start a conversation and challenge at scale, these can still be selectively deployed. And next, evaluating performance and optimizing our strategy. So we have content out in the world and we've gone through the exercise and steps to date. It's time to ask ourselves these questions. What worked and what didn't work? Specifically against that goal that we defined and how we defined measuring success for our campaign. Second, how can we make improvements? Okay, so we didn't get the reach that we wanted. Perhaps we allocate more of our budget to promoting this with paid advertising, or we did not get the engagement that we would like through likes, comments, shares. How do we optimize this to be more shareable and encourage that through copy or content that is, communicating in a way to our audience to take action? And then where do we go next from here? Once we've understand what worked, what didn't, we can strategize those improvements and deploy them from there. So in terms of the next step of our time, I'm going to look to leverage the question function that we have available to you all through the IAS forum. And we are going to run a group exercise. I will share out some of your responses. I'm going to give us a scenario and we will walk through the exercise together as a way for us to deploy some of the tactics that we just walked through in developing a content strategy for social media. So hopping into it, feel free to share your answers through the question function. The scenario that I'd like to give you is, for relevance, to our discussion today, let's just say that our product is actually a service in this instance. So the goal is, how do I get my new product out in the world through social media? I'm going to give us a more specific scenario. Let's say that our product is a service, and this service is of benefit to underinsured or uninsured people living with HIV and AIDS that allows for them to get care at low cost or nothing. So the first question I would have for you is, who can tell me what the goal of our message would be here? We have a service that is of benefit to underinsured or uninsured people living with HIV, AIDS, that allows for them to get care at low cost or nothing. I will look at our questions and see if anything filters in here. And thinking back to our goal framework that we discussed, what is the message that we want to tell, and why is it important that we get this out into the world? Still waiting for anything to come through. We'll see if we get anything on my side. Great, so the first is from Deborah, it looks like. It says, get the word out to those who would benefit. That sounds like a correct goal in my opinion. So we want to get the word out to those who are underinsured or uninsured and living with HIV/AIDS. So now that we have a goal in mind, getting the word out to our audience, which is those uninsured and underinsured, we need to define our message. So in defining our message, think from the shoes of the person that we're talking to. Understand what this service could mean to them. And let's think about some messages that resonate with them. I'll give you a moment to populate some message concepts into the chat function. And some more goals in the meantime that came through is getting people living with HIV interested and involved, breaking down barriers to care to people who have difficulties accessing care. And so on our message, thinking from their shoes and understanding what this service could mean to them, let's think about some messages that resonate with them. Someone said life-changing. That was Deborah again. Something that I would think about in their shoes is perhaps there is an unawareness of this service. Perhaps there is stigma around HIV and AIDS and being underinsured or uninsured. And next, and I think this one will come fairly intuitive to us, but perhaps it won't. Who is our audience? Is it just those that are underinsured or uninsured? Is it those that may know someone who could use this service? I'd love to hear your thoughts on who our audience is beyond specifically that target of who we want to attract with this service. And in the meantime, I will read from Martin Anna, a message. If you have HIV and AIDS and are underinsured, you can access affordable care. I think that is a great message. So now we've defined our goal, getting people living with HIV and AIDS interested and involved, breaking down the barriers to care to people who have difficulties accessing. And our message is, if you have HIV, AIDS, and are underinsured or uninsured, you can access affordable or perhaps free care. In defining our audience, Michael Luella, we have another expanded group, caseworkers who help people uninsured. I think that's a great build on the audience that we have here. An ad from my side, I would say, people who know or live with someone who is perhaps dealing with this as well. Obviously, we know that this is a broad audience group, knowing that HIV/AIDS affects people of all ages, races, genders, locations. So the next question would be, how do we reach this audience, right? What platforms would we be thinking about in order to reach as broad of an audience as this group could be? I'd love to hear your thoughts on which platforms make sense for a broader audience. I'll give you a minute for these answers to filter in. First answer is in Facebook. Very good. I would tend to agree. Facebook is a great platform for broad, often global audiences. Daily active users are in the billions, as most of us are aware now. Any other platforms that you feel have reach and resonate with this type of broad audience that we should be considering? I would say from my perspective, another that has as broad of reach as a platform like Facebook is YouTube. YouTube is, I believe, about 2 billion active users, maybe more. And so also, I think it gives us a little bit of change in terms of thinking about the content as the next step. Facebook, a little bit more short and quick content consumption. YouTube, would allow for us to have a little bit more thorough and long form storytelling. I have some other answers in here from Annalisa. ADV on Netflix, Amazon Prime, maybe YouTube, TikTok, Twitter. All of these are large global platforms that make sense for reaching audiences that we've defined here. And then moving into our next step of defining our audience, we know where they're at, but now the voice. We need to understand the voice and tone that we reach and communicate to them with. If you had to give a persona to the voice and tone of this content, what would it be? I think there's many options in terms of how we personify the content voice that we're approaching this campaign with. And to reiterate, our goal is getting people living with HIV/AIDS interested and involved, breaking down barriers to care for people who have difficulties accessing it. Our message is, if you have HIV and AIDS and are underinsured or uninsured, you can access affordable or free care. The platforms that we've defined for our audience are Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. And now it's, how are we talking to them, right? So I would love to understand, if we put a persona to that, maybe it's a caring friend. Maybe it is the voice, or we have empathetic as a note in our comments from Deborah. Thank you for that. Empathetic, yeah, caring friend. Maybe it's, maybe it is the voice of the best caseworker that you've had, going back to our discussion earlier in terms of people who help the uninsured find care. I think the empathetic is a great voice and tone theme for us to think about in our content. And then moving forward, now that we've defined our audience, knowing primarily that it is those affected by HIV/AIDS that may be under or uninsured, as well as those that support them, be it caseworkers, those who care for or are family and friends of, and the voice that we're approaching them with, this is now time for us to define success. So I'd love to hear from you all. For this campaign, what does success look like for this content in the context of our service? What would we define as success in the content creation that we are bringing to life to support this service that supports the under or uninsured? Great, so some answers are rolling in. Back to our audience, we have a family elder or a grandmother in terms of the voice and tone. And defining success. We have sharing of posts. I think that this is great. Obviously, sharing on social is a key metric for how we reach more people. Another answer, people contacting the website or organization to get information on how they can access care. I think that that's an incredible answer. Obviously, we want to encourage action to utilize our service, right? Sharing of videos, if on YouTube. I think sharing of content generally will only help us gain more eyes on the content and impressions of the message that we're aiming to reach our audience. Another is success will be achieving the goal set to achieve with the content created. So exactly, and that the goal that we've defined is supporting those living with HIV/AIDS that are under or uninsured. Now next, marrying the two, our audience and our goal. So we know our message here is to reach these people living with HIV/AIDS that are under and uninsured with the message of, if you are uninsured, you can still access care at an affordable or at no cost. And our audience is those living with HIV/AIDS and those that support them. So what are some content ideas that we can come up with to effectively communicate this service message to them? I'd love to get creative and hear what you think are some good ideas for content. No bad ideas. I won't put any names to the answers that we receive in terms of content ideas, so everyone can feel free to share. We have a young person sharing experience and relief with a friend as a content idea. Love that. What content can achieve this message for our audience? Let some more answers roll in. This is a great one, a testimonial from someone who is uninsured, who tells their story with us. I love that. Exploring the benefit of the service that we provide, right? That is an excellent use of content, in my opinion. And there's many ways that that can come to life. It could be short. It could be something more long form. It could even be a quote, a graphic. What are some other ideas in terms of content that we could create to bring this message to life? And I want to emphasize no bad ideas. Someone else noted that generally the cost of HIV medications is astounding. Did you know that there is a way to get these medications for free or reduced charge? I think that that is a great example of leading with the pain point, right? You know, the audience that we've defined, the problem that they are facing is they are under or uninsured, and that results in, of course, we do know that the cost of HIV medications can be astronomical at times. And so did you know that there's a way to get these medications for free or reduced charge? Leading with the solution is an excellent content idea, and it can come to life in many, many ways. Another idea rolled in, getting someone with a lived experience to share through the use of creative arts. I think that that's exactly, what we saw today from the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation in that video that we saw at the welcome. A lot of individuals who had lived experience sharing through the use of creative arts. And any additional, oh, we got two more. Oh, I love this one. A music video singing the praises of how easy it was to get covered. Music, very universal appeal. We know that our audience is broader than some campaigns may be. And so this is an excellent way to get in and reach larger audiences. And it's also entertaining, which I prefer to build campaigns and content that have an entertainment factor to them. So I love to see this idea. Love it. And I'll see if any other ideas roll in. But I think that this was an excellent walkthrough of a mock scenario discussing our service and understanding how we can deploy these steps to really define, what our message is, who we're trying to reach and where they exist online, how we want to measure success for this service, right? And then bringing that message and audience together to create content ideas. We just did a brainstorm, and I'm proud of you. That was very excellent. This is what my company and myself do all day, is run through these steps to bring to life creative solutions online and create community through that content. I really, really hope that this exercise was beneficial to you, I am going to invite you to email us. I will share that out shortly. If you would like to receive this presentation to have on file for the next time that you have to creative storytell for these platforms. I'm going to thank you for having me. I hope that you've learned something new about how to approach storytelling on social platforms today. And I want to thank you for the work that you do to better our world for those living with HIV/AIDS. And last but not least, I do want to thank our partners at Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation for having me to speak today. As I noted, if you would like a copy of today's presentation, please feel free to email our team at etaf@xxartists.com, etaf@xxartists.com. We would love for you to deploy these storytelling lessons and strategy in your own work. And so please do not feel shy to email us, etaf@xxartists.com, to get a copy of today's presentation. I'm going to thank you all for joining us for this session hosted by the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. And I hope that you all learned about how to storytell to bring cause and change to the world. And thank you so much for your time.